Welcome to the Vine Resources Podcast Show with your host, David Lawrence.
Welcome to another edition of the Vine Resources Podcast Show. I'm delighted to have with me today Ed Klinger. Ed is the CEO of FLOK. We're going to talk a lot about FLOK today. Thank you for letting us come to your office today.
Thanks for having us. You're very welcome.
Yeah, well, we're up in close to Hatton Gardens in central London. Ed, why don't you share with our listeners a little bit more about your company and what you do here?
Sure. So I'm the CEO of a company called FLOK. We're a relatively young insurtech startup. So when I say insurtech, I mean we're one of those few companies that's kind of up and coming in London, which is the hub for insurtech, that's attempting to basically digitize the insurance industry and make insurance something that is actually convenient and maybe even enjoyable rather than something that is a torturous affair that people dislike. That's why the insurtech industry now, more so than ever, has just absolutely burst through in the same way that fintech did a few years ago. The digitization of insurance is happening right now, and we're at the forefront of it at FLOK. What we're focusing on specifically is a very niche line of business, which is the drone insurance space. So we're really riding two waves, the insurtech wave and also the drone industry wave. What we've realized is that there's a massive opportunity for digital, data-driven insurance companies to actually embrace new emerging technologies like the drone industry and pioneer an entirely new type of product. In our instance, it's a pay-as-you-fly product, insurance that's paid for by the hour rather than by the year, to accommodate to these new emerging technologies. And the way that we do things very, very differently to traditional insurers, rather than selling an annual policy, a piece of paper that lasts for 1 year and covers your drone business for all of the different accidents and risks that you're undertaking or might undertake, what we do is we actually sell micro-duration insurance policies, so very, very short insurance policies that last, like I said, from just 1 hour, which are priced in real time, and the price of those policies is actually dependent on real-time data. So the higher the risk that you're undertaking as a drone pilot, the higher you will pay for one of our insurance policies. The lower the risks that you're taking as a drone pilot, the lower you'll pay, and you purchase our insurance policies through a mobile phone or over the web.
Amazing. And that's really, I mean, the app looks fantastic as well, and obviously very simple to use, which is what you want that customer experience to be. What would a typical customer be requesting, and what would the risk profile change? Demographic, location, what are the kind of factors normally?
So we have a whole range of customers, anyone from farmers who are using drones for agricultural purposes, maybe they want to do a survey of their crops, through to companies like the BBC who are using drones for photography or videography purposes, through to some of the world's largest oil and gas inspection companies who are throwing up kind of £500,000 worth of equipment at any given time to actually do an inspection of an oil rig which is out to sea. Yep. So a huge range in terms of the kinds of customers that we actually accommodate to. In terms of the risk profiles that these people or these companies and organizations have, it really depends on the flight that they're doing and the kind of equipment that they're using. So you can imagine if someone's going out in a relatively deserted field with a relatively light drone, maybe one that you can hold in a single hand, and throwing it up to take some photos of a field around them on a relatively calm day where there aren't high winds or high rains, that's a pretty low risk flight, right? The amount of damage that organisation could cause to its surroundings by virtue of its flight is actually relatively low. So were you to insure that one single flight on our app, you might be paying £4.95 for the hour. And we would cover all of the damage that flight could cause, up to say £1 million worth of damage, but also the damage to the drone itself if something were to go wrong and that drone were to crash. On the completely other end of the spectrum, some of the organisations that we insure are putting, like I said, £500,000 worth of equipment in the air at any given time. These things are absolute beasts. They're not the kinds of drones that we see on TV. We're talking about kind of serious industrial equipment, often with hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of sensors actually embedded within them or attached to them. And these guys and girls are throwing these machines up, effectively large flying robots, over highly sensitive sites. So that might be nuclear power plants, it might be busy public areas, or it might be oil rigs out at sea. And that has a dramatically different risk profile to the kind of flight I described earlier. So you might be paying up to £1,000 for an hour for insurance for equipment like this. And we cover absolutely everyone in between that range.
Amazing. Well, it's a great app. It's a great experience, as I said, as a user, and it's good to hear actually you've got such a diverse customer base as well. Tell me what a typical day, though, looks like in the business for you as the CEO.
There probably isn't a typical day right now. We're rapidly scaling our team and our company. If we'd done this interview a year ago, there probably would have been 9 of us in this room. There's now closer to 20, and that's going to double again in the next 12 to 18 months. So I'm spending a lot of my time hiring and actually building a pipeline of who we need to bring into the company to allow us to hit our very obnoxiously ambitious strategic targets and goals for the year and for next year. So a lot of my time is spent hiring, but in terms of where else I am, there's just no ordinary day. And the reason is like I said, we cover a vast range of customers, everyone from very tiny micro SMEs with single individual pilots right through to the world's largest drone fleets. We now cover Europe's largest drone fleet, which is doing relatively complex flights in the oil and gas space, and everyone in between. So we have a diverse range of sales and marketing teams internally. We're building those teams, we're managing and hiring for those teams simultaneously. But at the same time, we're actually embarking on an even more ambitious strategy as an organisation, which is to launch our platform proposition. And I'll explain briefly what this means because it relates heavily to where I spend my time. We have built over the last 3 years a insurance technology platform. And what I mean by that is we've built from scratch an end-to-end data-driven insurance platform that can do everything from suck in real-time data about the weather or about your location or population density near to where you are, can convert that large unstructured data set into a meaningful metric of risk. So we can go from having lots of data to a single risk metric that tells you how high or how low risk a single event is, in this case it's flying, and then we can actually, with that, price that risk in partnership with an insurance partner. In the drone industry we use Allianz, and then sell a very bespoke real-time insurance policy and provide that policy to you, the end customer, via a digital distribution platform. In our instance, it's a mobile app or it's a website. Now, everything I've just described is up and running and working very well in the drone industry, which is why we've managed to grow our book of business in the drone industry so incredibly quickly. But what we're actually working on as an organisation is extracting from that the core technology platform and actually making that platform available to other insurers in other industries entirely. So we've been approached by insurance companies in pretty much every industry you can imagine, from space flight launches through to automotive, to marine, to aviation, to travel. The insurance industry is crying out for this kind of digital, data-driven solution because the insurance industry hasn't really changed for the last 150 years. So we're actually bringing this platform to them. And so a lot of my time is spent building out a team of expert technologists so that we can build this platform, building a sales team so that we can sell this platform, and then actually building a strategy as an organisation so that we can sell this platform directly into insurance companies who can then leverage it in a whole range of industries, not just drones. Well, so apologies for my long answer.
That's great, and this industry is changing fast, and we'll come on to what you think the industry is going to look like in a few years shortly, because it's going to be very different, I think, isn't it? Who's perhaps had an impact on you as a business leader? Who's been a mentor to you or someone that you've looked up to, and why?
So I'll give maybe a slightly non-traditional answer to this question. So obviously I read quite a bit, and so I've been massively inspired by some of the most famous business leaders out there, as you can imagine, whose books I've read or who I've been lucky enough to meet. So I've spent a very short amount of time with Elon Musk, which was mind-blowing. And he's one of my massive inspirations, but he's definitely not one of my mentors, unfortunately. If you're out there, Elon, I'd love a session. I think I'm actually going to go with a slightly stranger answer, which is my business partner, Anton. So we met when this idea for FLOK was completely embryonic, right? It was just a university thesis that Anton had written at Imperial. I had written another university thesis at Cambridge where I was doing my master's, and they both hit on very similar topics, right? The topic was the use of real-time data for risk analysis in the drone industry. We both wrote very similar thesis papers. Now, I was introduced to Anton through a mutual friend, and we decided to start this company. In the last 3 years, Anton and I have realised that we're exceptionally different. We're absolute polar opposites, right? We're on different sides of the spectrum, but we've managed to work together extremely well, almost as a result of being so different. The reason that is because we have a very high level of mutual respect for each other, and we make sure to be brutally open and honest with each other when we disagree, and to work through our disagreements collaboratively rather than just butt heads, but also because we complement each other in our skill sets. So I'm much more kind of open and enthusiastic and driven by big ideas and big visions, and Anton is ultra practical and very data driven, and always adopts a kind of realistic approach to how we can actually implement the many ideas I have, some of which are terrible. So I'm kind of very much on the creative, big vision side of things, and Anton's on the very practical, pragmatic side of things, which means that we have a really nice degree of balance as a company. I don't think a company can exist with just one of those things. It really has to have both. And sometimes both of those things are locked up within one individual, which is this kind of ultimate idea of the perfect founder, and sometimes it's split across two individuals. And in our instance, I think we come together and work together quite nicely to keep each other in check and keep the company moving quickly and keep big ideas flowing, whilst also having a respect for the people who actually have to go and implement those ideas, which are the staff that we employ, who are also phenomenal.
So obviously you talked a little bit about the growth of the company going from 20 and now doubling over the next 12 to 18 months. So what about employee engagement? What are you doing, and your co-founder, what are you both doing from the top to really engage your employees?
Good question. So we have some core cultural values, if you will, pillars that we think it's important to adopt and agree on right from the beginning when setting up the company. And we actually have a number of initiatives in place to make sure that we're always kind of living those values and living and breathing them, right from upper management all the way down to the newest intern and everyone in between. And in terms of employee engagement, one of our values is own it, right? So this is the idea of genuine ownership and allowing everyone in the business to own what they do. And we mean that in a very practical sense, as in every single person who works at FLOK actually owns stock in the business, so that as the business grows and succeeds, the value of the stock that they hold actually grows with that growth. So that's the very literal sense of ownership that we mean when we say that it's one of our core cultural values. But we also like giving our employees, regardless of how senior or how junior they are, genuine ownership over their element of the business. And that actually massively drives engagement, because when people feel like they are in control, everything from setting strategy to vying for resources to putting together business cases, which can go all the way to me in 5 minutes if it's worth it, people feel like they can make a genuine difference to the outcome of this company, and they can, right? So we've had completely brand new junior staff members pitch as to why we should send them abroad on a relatively exciting trip to win business in new companies in new countries with new organisations that we've never met or worked with before. And because we attempt to embody this idea of ownership within the company, and we genuinely try to live by it, if they can make a good business case and they can own that business case and demonstrate why that trip or why this new initiative that they want to start is worthwhile and worth company resources, they will get that, right? They will receive that. And I think that actually massively drives engagement, because when people feel like they can make a genuine massive impact, even as the company grows, you start to see the value of ownership becoming something that is genuine and real and drives engagement in the business.
What do you think, Ed, is the biggest challenge facing business leaders today?
I can speak quite confidently about what I think is one of the biggest challenges facing startup CEOs in London.
Okay, share that with us.
Rather than just business leaders more generally. The reason I say that is because I run a bunch of groups and meetups with a lot of CEOs of young, growing technology companies in London, and we share a bunch of our problems with each other.
What are they saying?
So the most common problem, without doubt, is hiring good talent, especially in the technology sector in London. Incredibly competitive. Salaries are increasing at an exponential rate, and there simply isn't enough talent out there, especially in technology, to deliver what's needed by these rapid scale-ups, let's call them, startups which are starting to kind of double the size of their team every 12 to 18 months. And I'm seeing this, not just, we see this at FLOK, obviously, we're constantly hiring and attempting to hire. We can't hire fast enough, but we see it with almost every single technology company that we deal with. I think that there are a number of reasons as to why this is happening specifically in London, but one that I'm actually hearing a lot is this idea of purpose, right? And companies now, people aren't just after the high salaries. Companies have to do so much more than just pay large salaries if they want to get good talent in, because a startup like this, a startup that's pre-Series C, is never going to be able to compete with Google or Facebook or private equity or hedge fund. It's just not possible on salary. Where you have to compete and where you have to kind of get your one-upmanship when it comes to hiring, especially technology talent, is in this idea of kind of purpose-driven organisation, where people feel like they're getting up in the morning and coming to work and actually working on a much bigger mission or vision that they feel can change the world for the better. And I think that's a relatively new concept for a lot of startup founders to really get their head around. And often I actually find that startup founders and CEOs have that vision, they have that purpose, they feel it and they understand it, but they're not necessarily that good at communicating it to their team or to the broader world, right? So they often feel it themselves, and they get out of bed in the morning to achieve their purpose, but they're not very good at letting other people know about it, and that makes it quite difficult to hire. So one of the things that we really focus on at FLOK is helping our employees and our investors and the broader community understand what our much bigger vision is. Our much bigger vision, it's not just in the drone industry, it's not just in the insurance industry, it's a global vision to make the world a safer and smarter place. Right? So that is our driving force. We want to make the world a safer and smarter place, and how we actually do that is by building unique world-first technology in the drone industry, in the insurance industry, that we believe enables end users, the customers who actually purchase our product, to understand the risks that they pose to the world around them and to mitigate that risk and avoid that risk if possible. So we actually make money by making the world safer, by making the world smarter, and that is a massive vision that I'm constantly trying to communicate and find ways how we communicate that to everyone from the team, to our investors, to even our customers, who like that vision as well.
What's the best business advice that you've ever received that you can share with us?
Right when I started FLOK, right at the very beginning with Anton, we were relatively secretive about the work that we were doing. There was no other company in the world who was building what we were building. And we wanted to keep it to ourselves a little bit, because we realised that, if you get the word out too early, it's not long before some giant evil corporation comes along and builds it, or some other startup comes along and builds it faster than you. The best advice I've ever been given was to completely forget that way of thinking and to massively embrace being open in every possible sense of the word. Sharing our idea loud and proud, whether that's on stage at a data science festival, which is then uploaded to YouTube, or whether that's internally with your team, whether that's externally with investors, or online in press releases, or anything else. This idea of completely forgetting that relatively traditional view of keeping your ideas and your IP close to your chest. We decided to take that advice and embrace that, and it completely changed our own lives and also the life of this company. As soon as we started talking proudly about our ideas on stage and engaging in debate and arguments and long drinks at the pub with people who we met, who had seen us speak or who had seen a press release that we put out there, we realised that actually our idea, the original idea that we had, was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. And we started actually piecing that puzzle together with the ideas that came back to us and the questions that came back to us from the audience. One kind of very real anecdote, which just, in my opinion, just goes to show how valuable this idea of openness is. The idea to turn our initial technology into what it is today came from a question in the audience. So we were building a risk analysis software, a software that could actually ingest lots of real-time data to quantify the risk of a drone flight. And it was only by speaking on stage and hearing questions from the audience, and we heard someone actually put up their hand and say, do you know how valuable this is in the insurance industry? The insurance industry is crying out for a solution to how to quantify complex new risks. The insurance industry doesn't know how to do it. And you guys have built a platform that can convert this data into a real-time risk metric. Have you thought about plugging insurance into the back of that and turning that into a price? And we were on stage at the time, and we just thought it was a fantastic question. We started talking, having a kind of discussion with the audience about it, and the idea emerged as a result of these kinds of conversations, and the platform actually took shape as a result of the conversations that we had with the people around us. If we had been playing our cards close to our chest and thinking that we could figure everything out ourselves, we would never have learned half of what we ended up learning as a result of being public and open about it.
That's great. And I've heard that many times from startups who go through that process and don't want to, have any identity, and actually that never goes any further. Just out of interest, how does the incumbent insurance market respond to the technology changes? Do you see that changing in the industry? How are they adapting to that, or are they moving fast enough? What's your view?
Okay, so you asked a lot of questions in that question, so I'm going to pick it apart a little bit. So let's start with what's going on in insurance generally. So I think insurance is having a bit of a wake-up call at the moment, and it's happening right now. It started a couple of years ago in London and Silicon Valley in New York, and it's really, really taking root and starting to kind of exponentially change. Insurance companies are investing a significant amount of their own money into startups. They're actually starting their own startups internally. They're building these kind of incubation, innovation labs, whereby they basically spin out a separate building. They put innovative people in that building way away from their traditional building. They don't want the two to intermix. And then the third approach is partnering, right? They're partnering with insurtech startups and working with insurtech startups who are bringing this kind of Silicon Valley, innovate fast, break things culture to the insurance space. So insurance and the insurance industry is definitely waking up to the change. In terms of, are they moving fast enough? My answer is no. So what we're going to find in the next few years is a kind of innovate or die mentality amongst insurers who are waking up to just how quickly the world is changing. So to make that point kind of more real, the risks of tomorrow don't look anything like the risks of today or yesterday. Risks of tomorrow are driverless cars. They're planes that take off and land by themselves. They're boats that drive themselves. They're robots in the home. They're flying robots in the skies around us, right? These risks are nothing like what we're used to. They're nothing like what we've seen in the past. The insurance industry fundamentally works by analysing data from the past in order to predict what's going to happen in the future, right? There's hundreds of years worth of data on a specific industry. Let's take automotive. An insurance company might have 60 years worth of data from automotive histories and crashes. And they can use that to relatively accurately predict what's going to happen next in the automotive sector, until such a point that the automotive sector looks nothing like it used to. And that point is when cars become autonomous, right, for example. And at that point, the insurance industry and these insurance companies have to wake up and dramatically adapt the way that they do business. They're going to have to bring in new data sets. They're going to have to build completely new mathematical models, and they're going to have to engage with customers in a completely new way as well. And that is why that's one of the reasons why the insurtech sector has emerged and exploded onto the scene so rapidly. It's because the world is changing at an exponential rate, and the traditional way of doing business just does not apply. And so what's happening is that there's this massive gap opening up between what the world actually looks like and the way that the world is perceived by the insurers. And what's filling that void, that kind of vacuum, is startups and technology companies and the technology arms of these insurance companies on occasion. So what's going to happen in the next few years, if you were to ask me kind of what my prediction is for the industry going forwards, what's going to happen is those insurance companies that embrace this change and that genuinely accept, we don't know how to cover the future, right? We don't know how to apply our models and our historical data sets to what the world of tomorrow looks like because it's so different. We need to dramatically change the way we do business, and we're going to do that by doing things we've never done before, like building a team of specialist developers in San Francisco, or by partnering with a rapid growth insurtech startup. Those are the companies that are going to fill those voids. And other companies that don't embrace this next generation of insurance simply aren't going to survive. And that's what I mean by this kind of innovate or die mentality.
Can you share with us perhaps a story from your earlier life, your childhood, that influenced your work ethic today?
Yes, I suppose I could. Not so much a story, but just something that happened to me. This is unplanned, so I'm just going to say it off the cuff. So I've grown up with illness as a big part of my own life. My mum has had an illness her whole life, which has forced me to be relatively independent, and has also put risk and safety at the forefront of my mind, maybe even subconsciously. So I think that's been a massive influencing factor in my decision to be relatively independent while starting a business, but also to start a business which in some way actually relates to kind of health and using data and technology to make the world safer. Even if that's a subconscious thing that's happened, I suppose it makes sense when looking back and understanding the kind of macro forces that influence what I'm interested in and what I care about. So that's one element of how something that's happened in my past has influenced the way that I run my company today. I guess another one would be, this is much more recent, but I actually spent time working at a company called Blackstone, which is a private equity company. This couldn't be a more dramatically different story to the one I just told. When I tell people I worked at Blackstone, I was only there for a short amount of time. Most of my friends in the startup space find it quite funny because it's so dramatically different to running a high growth technology startup, right, which is kind of super fast moving and innovative and all these things, and then you contrast that to private equity and working at Blackstone. There's a massive difference there. But actually I would say that some of the skills I learned at Blackstone, some of the mentalities I learned at Blackstone have been some of the most fundamental driving forces in the way that I run this company, right? It's a massive respect for process and compliance, which is incredibly valuable when you're running an insurtech startup that sells aviation insurance products, some of the most heavily regulated products imaginable. We deal with two sets of regulators, insurance regulators and aviation regulators simultaneously. We've got £50 million worth of liability going out with our products. So a respect for process and compliance was actually, it was imbued in me to some extent by my time at Blackstone, as well as a kind of solid grasp of finances and a respect for financial modelling, which is very much forefront of mind in a private equity company, but not so much at startups. And I found that investors actually appreciate that immensely, and it's quite rare for startup. From what I've seen, from the feedback that we get from some of our investors, some startup founders and CEOs see finances as almost a kind of necessary evil, whereas at Blackstone it's the absolute driving force behind everything that happens in the office. So I think those two, being forced to really understand at length and to some depth process and compliance and finance has had a massive impact on the way that I've decided to build and run this company.
I've got one final question for you.
Sure.
Before we finish off, what's if you were going back to your 20s, early 20s, and you were giving yourself one piece of advice, what's the one thing that you would say to yourself now, looking back?
So, worth caveating, I'm 26 now, so it's only a few years, even though I've aged horrendously. What's funny is a highly regulated company. I think the one bit of advice I would give myself is probably to take risk earlier and to be brutally honest with myself about the actual downside of that risk, because often you can convince yourself that the downsides of whatever risk you're facing could be cataclysmic and could be life-threatening. But when you're actually genuinely honest with yourself, you realise that you've just massively inflated those downsides because you actually want to avoid taking the risk. So a perfect example would be this company. I ummed and ahed as to whether to start this company for months and months and months because I was so dramatically worried about the risks of starting a startup. I think most founders, CEOs probably go through the same process. And it was only after some very good advice from friends and family and working very closely with Anton, who I ended up kind of joining to start this company, that I realised that the downsides of when you're young, early 20s, starting a technology company, the very, very worst that can happen is that you have a really hilarious time, meet some phenomenal people, build a really great team, and learn an enormous amount about a new industry, about how to build a company, about how to hire, about how to build a culture in a purpose-driven organisation, and maybe even in some small way make an impact on the world. That's pretty much as bad as it gets, right? Because that's almost a guarantee that all of those things will happen if you really pour your heart and soul into building a company. And then if it all goes tits up, you'll survive, right? And I think that realizing that you'll survive part was what inevitably led to us kind of taking the plunge and starting FLOK, and it's been the best, most exciting journey I've ever had since starting it. Every single day has been an absolutely insane adventure, and we get to work every day and just take a deep breath and say, okay, what is today going to throw at us? And it's always something exciting. I don't think there's been a single dull day since starting this company, and we're almost 3 years in.
Amazing. And such an exciting year ahead with all the development in the business going forward as well. Ed, thanks so much for taking part in the podcast today and letting us come to your office as well in central London. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, connect with you personally, find out more about the company, how can they go about doing that?
So best way would probably be just find me on Twitter. I'm relatively active on Twitter, generally posting about everything to do with technology and startups and policy and regulation and so on. So my handle is at Ed Leon Klinger, which is my full name.
Perfect, thank you. And they can obviously check out the website at flockcover.com if they want to find out more.
Well plugged, absolutely.
Thank you so much. You're welcome.
Flockcover.com, and if people are interested in actually joining our team, we are literally constantly hiring, and we hire entrepreneurs. So what I mean is we hire people who are self-starters, who are happy to come in here, receive some direction, some strategy, but then just crack on and build their own business in a business. And that everyone we've hired in this room is their own entrepreneur, and they're taking control of their element of the business, and they're doing a fantastic job. So if you go to flockcover.com and just click on jobs, you'll see the open positions. And if none of those open positions looks good to you, just write to us and tell us who you are, and we'll find a position for you.
Ed, thank you so much for that, and good luck with the business this year.
Thanks very much for the session.
You're welcome.
We really hope you enjoyed our podcast. If you're listening to this on iTunes, please take a moment to give us a review. 4 stars would be good, but 5 stars would be amazing.